We're back live on the Alex Jones Show. I'm filling in for Alex today. I'm Paul Joseph Watson, joined in studio by David Knight. First, I want to cover just a couple of stories here. One out of Zero Hedge. Will the Fed let the stock market crash before an election? This is Charles Hugh Smith. Anyone in their position with the tools at hand would not have any other real option other than to buy stocks in whatever quantity is needed to reverse the selling and blow the shorts out of the water. So there's speculation that the Fed could be preparing to intervene in the stock market before the election, either to cause a crash or to prevent one. We've had a lot of negative stock news over the past recent weeks. What would happen to incumbents in the election a few weeks from now if the stock market crashes? The happy story that all is well and you would be wise to re-elect the incumbents responsible for the economic good news would be reduced to rubble. So they're speculating that this could be part of the October surprise that many people have talked about, an economic panic right before the election, which could really shake up the midterms there. So that's an interesting article out of Zero Hedge, a potential October surprise in the economy. Also from Zero Hedge today, China claims US behind Hong Kong protests. A commentary in the official newspaper of the Chinese Communist Party on Saturday accused the US of trying to foment a colour revolution in Hong Kong. So we've already had claims that foreigners are behind these protests in Hong Kong. We've had evidence that the National Endowment for Democracy, as it was involved in Ukraine and many other colour revolutions, is active again in Hong Kong. But now, for the first time, Chinese state media has directly blamed the United States for fomenting that uprising as a colour revolution to destabilize Beijing, just as they attempted to do, of course, and succeeded in Kiev, overthrowing the legitimately elected government and replacing it with an EU vassal puppet state. So we're continuing to watch developments in Hong Kong. David Knight, your comments on that, and also the news story out of the Washington Post: probe of contract for illegal silencers leads to web of Pentagon secrets.
Yeah, you're talking about manipulating the stock market to make incumbents look good. It's kind of interesting to me, living in this country, that it seems like every 4 years, when if there's an incumbent president who's running for re-election, we can usually see a drop in gas prices. Right now, I think there's a lot of incumbents, especially in the Democrat Party, that are very concerned about their getting reelected. I think it's interesting we're seeing yet again another drop in gas prices, even though you've got a lot of unrest in the Middle East, which you would think would perhaps drive that up. Maybe that's just a coincidence, but this story that is up on Drudge right now to the Washington Post, it's a real interesting little bit of intrigue that kind of surfaced from one particular case, and it is mushrooming to shed some light on this secretive organization within the Pentagon. They're saying that a criminal investigation has exposed a secret weapons program intertwined with allegations of a sweetheart contract, fake badges, and trails of destroyed evidence. Now, what this is a group of about 10 civilian employees, most of them retired military personnel, in something that is known as the Directorate for Plans, Policy, Oversight, and Integration. A directorate. This kind of sounds like something out of a communist country, doesn't it? But what they did was they ordered 349 silencers, and they paid a hot rod auto mechanic in California $1.6 million to make these silencers. Now, his cost in parts was only about $10,000, so that's a pretty good profit margin. The crux of it, they say, is whether or not these silencers were properly purchased for an authorized secret mission, or were they part of a rogue operation. And they've got a former senior Navy official speaking out on it. He says, "I know it sounds goofy, but it was like they were building their own mini law enforcement and intelligence agency." We've seen that before, haven't we? I mean, everything in this government, when everything is secret that the government does, and it's not just black ops, but I mean, it doesn't matter who you try to talk to from our perspective in government. Pretty much everybody throws up a shield. There's no transparency, no candor anywhere. When everything the government does is secret and everything that you do is an open book to them, that is a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe really for tyranny. They started destroying evidence, and one of the things that they came across was a stash of AK-47s, 1,600 of them. Now, of course, AK-47s are Russian weapons. They're not used by the U.S. military. And as the Washington Post points out, if the foreign-made weapons were equipped with unmarked silencers, the weapons could have been used by U.S. or foreign forces for special ops in other countries without any risk that they would be traced back to the United States. In other words, for a false flag.
For a false flag or to arm the Syrian rebels or
Yes.
even other entities. Of course, we know out of Benghazi, weapons flowed. That was hidden for a long time. It was later confirmed that weapons were being sent out of Benghazi to so-called moderate rebels in Syria. So they have to hide these programs behind this veil of secrecy. And obviously this could be another example of that.
And it was just last August that we had this report on Infowars.com. It's August 16th. Again, they were percolating the situation in Syria. The U.S. Army bought 600,000 AK-47 magazines fully loaded. The U.S. Army doesn't have any AK-47s officially. Okay, so who are they giving it to? What rebel groups are they secretly arming with that? And, of course, we know that there's been a lot of arming and training of rebel groups within Syria because that's the next state on their list. That's what all this ISIS stuff is about, is an excuse to get into the country one way or the other and start a war. Then they can go after the Syrian government itself in the pretense of fighting the rebels that they actually created and armed and trained.
Let's go to a call now. Martin in Tennessee, you're on the air. Go ahead, Martin.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to let you know that my opinion is that the CDC is nothing more than a supposed hybridized pseudo-government entity. We should not expect anything from them. They are much like the Federal Reserve. They are part of the agenda. We should protect ourselves.
Okay, thanks for the call. We're going to go to Steve in Arizona, who says he's a fire department worker regarding Ebola training. Steve, you're on the air. Go ahead. Do we have Steve? Steve's not there. Maybe we can get back to Steve. We'll go to Kurt in Oregon. Kurt, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, gentlemen. This is Kurt. I have a statement and a question. About encryption, I'm a 25-year IT professional, and my thought is that whether it's Bitcoin or email or voting machines, there is no trustworthy code, open source, and not just transparent, and not just the algorithms transparent, but a plan to systematically review that. Because what we found with the OpenSSL virus was that it is open source and nobody ever actually peer reviewed it. Mm-hmm. And my question is really, where do we go from here? I have a lot of powerful progressive friends, and they're all in their own world and could care less about the things that we talk about here on InfoWars. And I believe the only war is the info war, and we lose anything if we lose the Constitution. We lose everything. I don't think we win the aftermath of this.
Well, I mean, we saw earlier, we covered the story about MSNBC, which, of course, is a liberal stronghold, record low viewing ratings. You know, we get, 3 million listeners a day just on the radio show alone. So they are waking up. They are coming over to our side, and it's part of that process of losing faith in the mainstream media, which we've seen definitely over the past 10 years. So we have to judge it by that benchmark. David Knight, the point about encryption, I mean, we had William Binney on recently. He said that people who use encryption, which I do for my email, they're the ones who get targeted, but still it is a good protection, a good, at least surface level of protection against invasive spying.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, one of the things, PGP was one of the first encryption programs that came out for emails by Phil Zimmerman like 20 years ago. And the big problem was if you're the only one doing the encryption, then you get the special attention, and they've got all the time in the world to decrypt it. You know, you can decrypt some of the people some of the time, but you can't decrypt everybody all of the time. But in terms of apathy, I think that's the greater issue. I think the apathy is the greater issue. And on this article that was linked on the Drudge Report today from TechCrunch, where they're talking about the interview with Ed Snowden, where he said, get rid of Dropbox, avoid Facebook, avoid Google. What I thought was the most interesting thing out of that article was the caption here where he says, he talks about why you should be concerned about privacy. And this is what you need to tell your friends if they're conservative or liberal and they just don't understand why this matters. He said, when you say, I have nothing to hide, you're saying, I don't care about this right. You're saying, I don't have this right because I got to the point where I have to justify it. the way rights work is the government has to justify its intrusion into your rights. And so that's one of the things that you really need to understand. And then the other thing that he said in the article is he says, we don't need to know every technical detail of what's going on in every program of the intelligence community, but we do need to know the bare and broad outlines of the powers our government is claiming they have and how they affect us and how they affect our relationships overseas. Because if we don't, we're no longer citizens. We no longer have leaders. We are subjects and we have rulers. I would say we are slaves at that point. I'd put a much stronger point on it, but very eloquent. That's from Ed Snowden. If you want to know why it matters, I think those are a couple of very good quotes to talk to your friends about. It does matter to have a right to privacy. However, I am very skeptical that there's anything out there that technologically protects us. I think we need to stand together. Primarily, we need to let them know that we're not going to stand for this. We need to insist that we have law enforcement leaders who will lock up people in the government if they break the law in terms of privacy, just like they would if they were robbing banks. I would expect the FBI director to lock up police officers if they were robbing people on the streets. I would expect him to lock up people within the federal government who are robbing us of our rights. And when he says distrust the government, but he doesn't do his job to lock up people who have violated the laws, who are criminals, he's not doing anything to make us have any confidence in this. He's just part of the problem, in my opinion.
And for people who say, you know, they don't care about their privacy, it's a complete misnomer, because as soon as you say, okay, well, give me your email password, give me access to your bank account, then they suddenly have real concerns about privacy. It's only with the government. You can trust the government, apparently, to violate your privacy, but not even your closest friends can be trusted with your email password. So, again, it's a cop-out, and they need to understand that government has always been the main threat, specifically with surveillance now. Even Eric Schmidt is warning that it's so invasive in terms of the internet that it could undermine the entire structure of the internet and break the World Wide Web. So, you know, I'd like to see the trendies who don't really care about privacy cope without the internet. I think they would begin to really care if that was a genuine threat, which many people are now saying it could well be. Kyle in Illinois, you're on the air. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, hi. This is Carl in Illinois.
Go ahead. What's your point today?
Okay, regarding this Ebola fiasco that's happening here in our country, someone may have brought this question up before, I'm not sure, but it's on my mind. If a mosquito bites an Ebola-infected person and then goes on to sting someone else, can mosquitoes and flies carry this disease forward? That's my question. I mean, this is a major concern because this is mosquito season, and most of America does have mosquitoes and flies that bite you. They take your blood, and they can also deposit germs into a human body.
Well, we don't know, you know, we don't know if it's vector-borne that way. Of course, there was a lot of fear about that with HIV. People were concerned that HIV could be transferred by mosquitoes because it was bloodborne. That turned out to not happen. They're saying they haven't noticed any situation where this has been transferred. But, you know, when we look at these cases, even with the Western doctors and nurses who go over there, they're telling us, I really don't know how I got it. And so that's what the concern is. Did they get it because it was airborne? Did they get it because of the aerosols? Did they get it because they touched something that someone else touched and there hadn't been enough time passed for the virus to die on the outside? Quite frankly, we really don't know. That's why I believe that we ought to exercise additional care, that those countries that are suffering from the epidemic should be sealed off. Not that we need to seal our borders as much as we need to seal that in, because they can go to intermediate countries and then come in that way. There's many ways that they can do it. And believe me, if it starts to affect 5 to 15% of the population, as the CDC is currently projecting it will in those countries, they will find a way to get out. If there's any way to get out, they're going to want to get out of that situation. Anybody would.
And of course, there were reports, and I think these were confirmed, that, you know, bats are a real delicacy over there in West Africa. People were eating these bats, catching Ebola that way if the bats were not properly cooked. So that was one way in which it was spreading. Regarding mosquitoes, I don't think that's been confirmed. Bob in Connecticut, go ahead. You're on the air, Bob.
Yeah, I want to say, hey, Paul, how you doing? And David, I just wanted to make an observation on our government's response to this Ebola. It's been totally inadequate. The CDC is complicit in it. The Ebola is airborne, and the DOD has known that since 1989. And I think this is just a war against the people of the United States. Otherwise, they would have closed down the air travel from Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Nigeria. What do you guys think about that?
Well, yeah, there was the 1989 experiment, I believe it was in Virginia. That was the case, wasn't it, where they proved that it was airborne to at least a limited extent.
They said they believed that it was, at least with aerosols. They wound up having to execute those monkeys because they couldn't stop it.
Yeah, and there was also the 2012 study in Canada. So
I look at this, Paul, and this article comes out today from Reuters. The U.S. needs to rethink Ebola infection control, says the CDC chief. They need a new strategy, he says. And I would ask, what strategy? I haven't seen or heard of any strategy. When they make mistakes, like the very first press conference that they had with the governor and the local health officials, they didn't have an explanation as to how come this lady was not treated right away, why they had not disinfected the apartment. So many things that we didn't even know at that time that they hadn't done. They didn't make any confession about what they had done and say, this is where we screwed up and this is how we're going to keep that from happening again. There is no strategy to contain this. They don't have any treatment for it. The only thing that appears to show some promise that has availability is the convalescent serum, and they're not doing anything to create a donor registry or test the blood there. They're not going to have any of these experimental vaccines for quite some time. They don't have a strategy for treatment or containment.
Brad in Louisiana, you're on the air. Go ahead, Brad.
Hi, Dave and Paul. The strategy is, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And the fact of the matter that nothing has happened over the past few decades to reach this magnitude. Nothing has been done to upgrade the protocols and the various mechanisms by which things are handled. So it's become a situation of not what you know, but who you know. My real question is the response to our Governor Bobby Jindal, who is a man's man, a God-fearing man who loves his state, about banning all flights into Louisiana, was answered quickly by the government of what I consider to be not the United States, but the cooperating states, has issued some edict whereby we are to dispose of the remains of these people. What do you know about it? And why is no one talking about these guillotines any longer?
Well, of course, we had the story on Friday about the FEMA coffin liners. That was an interesting thing out of Georgia. They were storing them back a few years ago. We can get into that after the break. Taking more of your calls on the Alex Jones Show live. David Knight in studio. We're going to wrap up the news after the break, go to a couple more of your calls. The website is Infowars.com. Final segment coming up. Stay tuned. Strange days have indeed found us, and with all the madness going on in the world, it's important to protect your immune system, and you can do that with the great line of products at InfoWarsLife.com, one of which is X2. This is key nascent iodine. Instead of drinking excessive amounts of bad-tasting iodine, get X2. It doesn't have that garbage taste that you will find in a lot of the mainstream brands. It's time to get prepared with Survival Shield X2 from Infowars Life. Secure yours at InfoWarsLife.com. And also, of course, iodine is very good for general health, for the general immune system, not just for protection against radiation exposure. Going to go to another one of your calls shortly, but just want to touch on this. David Knight, there's no talk of blocking the flights out of West Africa due to Ebola. Yet in 2011, and you can see this in the Forbes article, TSA threatens to cancel all flights out of Texas if groping bill passed. They basically threatened an embargo, a blockade on Texas if this bill passed, which banned TSA groping. They were quite prepared to block all flights coming in and out of Texas over TSA goons touching your junk and intercepting those deadly snow globes. Yet we have an Ebola threat imminent and nothing's being done. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the time this was happening, we subsequently learned from this lawsuit that John Corbett has going with the TSA. They published on pacer.gov an unredacted version. Later they put a redacted version up. And what they were saying is at exactly the same time, in internal documents, the TSA was saying there is no threat of terrorists against airports or airplanes, yet they were going to turn Texas into a no-fly zone because it was about controlling people. They don't want to control the disease. They want to control people. Talking about irrelevance, I mean, we got the Pentagon now unveiling a plan for dealing with climate change. I mean, they've got a climate change adaptation roadmap. I mean, whatever the problem, whether it's an Ebola outbreak in Africa or whether it's presumed climate change, they always want to use the military. It's like, when the only thing you got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and they're just not effective in these other areas. But that's not a real threat anyway. There's not any global warming going on, and they haven't tied it to CO2. The CO2 levels have gone up. The temperatures have not gone up. The real hockey stick is the number of people who are getting Ebola in the African nations, and they're completely ignoring that while they're spinning around playing with climate change and making no-fly zones out of the TS to support the TSA.
Steve in Arizona, final call. You're on the air. Go ahead. Make it quick.
Hi, I'm a firefighter from Arizona, and I just want to point out something real quick that's distressing. I haven't received any training formally from my department. I don't fault them for it. I kind of fault the government for it because of the erroneous information that's being disseminated. For example, the president saying that you cannot catch Ebola riding on a bus with someone. However, noticing that the CDC classifies Ebola as a biosafety level 4 agent, which requires a fully encapsulated suit to deal with. It's very distressing.
And there are only 4 of those biosecurity facilities in the entire United States, David Knight.
And you're not alone. It's not just firefighters and first responders. 85% of nurses, this is a story up on Infowars.com right now from Kit Daniels, 85% of nurses are not trained for Ebola. 76% of nurses also say the hospital that they work at has no policy for admitting Ebola patients. And yet we're told by the politicians, don't worry, everything's under control. They haven't done a thing. It's just blustering, bluffing.
And a lot of nurses have been protesting that they've not received that training either.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It's amazing. We'll continue to track it. A lot of breaking Ebola news going up today. Of course, we had the second patient in Dallas back on Sunday. Concerns out of Europe again that more Ebola cases could be arriving in the UK as well. We'll continue to track it on Infowars.com. Be sure to support us at InfoWarsLife.com and join us tomorrow on The Alex Jones Show Live. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Dr. Edward Group. Today I'd like to talk about the war on women. You've experienced and heard about the benefits of super male vitality. Now, the new formula has arrived. Introducing the new Super Female Vitality. I have specifically designed this formula to help the body naturally regulate itself without the use of artificial hormones. Key ingredients chosen from the highest quality sources. Each of these ingredients works synergistically with the female body in order to maximize overall vitality. You've heard the reviews and the feedback on how the original Super Male Vitality has revitalized relationships. Now, both the man and the woman can have the revitalization in their own bodies with Super Male Vitality and Super Female Vitality. Secure your Super Female Vitality today from our limited stock at InfoWarsLife.com.